Coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome to episode 5 of the Gilmore Way podcast. This week, we're going to be digging into Lorelai and Rory's brand new relationships from season 1 with Max and Dean. We already did a whole episode 2 weeks ago on Max Medina and his overall arc with Lorelai, but this week we're going to be exploring Lorelai's relationship with Max in parallel to Rory's relationship with Dean, which adds another layer of resonance to the mother-daughter relationship that's at the heart of this show. Because let's be honest, how often do you see a mother and daughter starting new relationships at the same time like this? And it's clear that the writers intended for there to be a number of poignant parallels between their lives and their loves, so that'll be the focus for today's discussion.
Before we dive in, please remember to do all those YouTube things, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share the link. It's fast and free, and it really helps us out. So let's keep the conversation going in the comments. And if you want to keep up with us or reach out, we can also be found on Instagram and Twitter, or you can send us an email. All links for those are below. Also, fair warning, there will be spoilers for the show. So if you haven't seen it and still watch this, that's not our problem. So without further ado, let's get into the summaries of the 2 episodes for this week, episodes 7 and 8 of season 1.
Okay, in episode 7, Kiss and Tell, Rory pops into Dosey's market to stalk Dean a little bit, and Dean ends up kissing her, which stuns Rory so much that she runs out of the market with a box of cornstarch that she grabbed as a pretense for going into the market in the first place. Rory runs to tell Lane that she got kissed and she shoplifted, which is overheard by Lane's mom, who later tells Lorelai. They eventually have a chat about it, and Lorelai is cooler than most moms would be under the circumstances. Later, while they're both at Dosey's picking up movie night snacks, Lorelai invites Dean to watch Willy Wonka with them, which freaks Rory out because not only is this her first ever date, but she has to have it on short notice and with her mom present. However, the date goes miraculously well, even though Lorelai gives Dean a bit of a shakedown about how he'll be pilloried by the town if he ends up hurting Rory.
Rory had some very important thickening needs.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, episode 8 is Love and War in Snow. A massive snowstorm traps Rory in Hartford at her grandparents' and Lorelai in Stars Hollow. Rory manages to get her grandparents to try a frozen pizza, clearly left in the freezer by one of their staff, and finds photo booth pictures of her mom and dad from 1983, which makes her wistful. Meanwhile, back in Stars Hollow, Lorelai takes a walk through the town to enjoy the snow and runs into Max Medina at Hughes Brothers with a broken-down car. They have an impromptu first date, and Max ends up back at the Gilmore house, but Lorelai is hesitant to let him in because she never lets guys stay over. With Rory in Hartford, she takes the opportunity to at least invite him in for coffee. But their makeout session is interrupted by the discovery that Lane has been hiding out from her teenaged embarrassment in Rory's room. She ran her hands through the luxurious hair of a boy she liked and had to flee her band concert to the safety of the Gilmores, which allows for a lovely moment between her and Lorelai. Rory apologizes for being an absent friend and being too caught up with her new school and her new boyfriend. So I love how there are back-to-back episodes here with burgeoning relationships for the Gilmore Girls.
Yeah, episode 7 was definitely Rory's and episode 8 was definitely Lorelai's, but Amy's brilliant. Not that we ever doubt that, but she did it that way for a reason, because I think if these 2 episodes had been done at different times where there was even a 2 or a 3 episode buffer between seeing these new relationships unfolding, it wouldn't have allowed anyone as a viewer to make the connections and the parallels that I think she wants us to draw from how these new loves are unfolding. So it was just a clever choice to have them back to back like that. And Amy's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, like we said in the opening, how often do mother and daughter get to go on like first dates and have their first kisses like right close to each other like that in time? So it's not something you see on TV. Well, maybe sometimes you see it on TV, but not like this. Not where, mother and daughter are so close and so intertwined and so open about their love lives with each other.
Mm-hmm. And the age definitely factors in here too. Because even if you do see moms and daughters getting into relationships, they're not as close in age as Lorelai and Rory are. So that definitely factors in as well. And we'll get to talking about how that plays into the immaturity, lack of, as things unfold within their relationships and within this conversation.
Yeah. Normally, if you're seeing it, it's because like the mom is on her second marriage or her third marriage. And it's you know, a very different scenario. Whereas here we have Lorelai, who's almost like an adult in a teenager's body, or sorry, a teenager in an adult's body, you know, like she is kind of stuck at the age of 16 in a way. Just, she had to skip a lot of steps in her adulthood in order to step up to raise Rory and to survive in a post-Gilmore economy. So it's almost like she's 16 again and going through it, right, along with Rory.
And I think she sees a lot of herself in Rory, not in the same way that Rory's going to get pregnant as a teenager, because Lorelai will definitely make sure that doesn't happen. But I think she's definitely noticing things with Dean and flashing back to her early days with Christopher. So she's seeing a lot of herself in her daughter, trying to advise her as best as she can, while knowing that at the same time, she doesn't really know a lot of what she's doing either, even though she's 32 at this point. So
yeah, she does acknowledge that. And we'll touch on that a little more later as well. But like, also to that point, they are really alike, but they're also really different. You know, 16-year-old Rory is not 16-year-old Lorelai. Lorelai was rebellious and was really open to taking risks and being very sort of iconoclastic. And she just wanted to be this free spirit and act out against the oppressive nature of, you know, high society Hartford. Whereas Rory is, you know, quiet and studious and conscientious and really lacks that sort of like desire to take risks. You see her kind of playing it very safe, especially in love at the beginning with Dean. So there are a lot of parallels to be drawn, but we also have to sort of like differentiate them in our minds a little bit because they are not exactly the same. I think people like to lean into that where it's like, oh, they're like, where you lead, I will follow. They're so close and so alike. Yes, but, you know, that kind of ignores all of these differences in their personalities that end up being salient to these relationships.
Yeah. So do you want to start? I think it's a good jumping point to, like, let's break down Rory's founding, like, just the relationship that she's discovering with Dean. I think that's a good place to start. What do you think about how they originally met, how they start interacting, what goes down in the market, how all of this starts unfolding?
I mean, the meet cute is kind of fun. Where it's like, God, you're like Ruth Gordon standing there with a tannis root, and he automatically knows that it's Rosemary's baby. So like, that's kind of cute. But, you know, their little walk through town is a little cringe because he sort of admits to stalking on her a little bit. Yeah. Like, you know, I've noticed you. Last week you were reading Madame Bovary, and this week it's Moby Dick. Paying a little too much attention, Dean.
Yeah.
They tried to play it off as cute. Comes off as a little stalkerish, not gonna lie.
Yeah, I mean, the one line where he's like, you know, this like guy just got like clocked with like a football and there was like blood and, you know, you just kept reading and he's like, I have to meet that girl. It's like, how, like, little too much there.
Yeah.
A little too and then focused in.
And Roy is like, maybe I'm just incredibly self-centered. Spoiler alert.
Yes.
He is.
Yes.
Yeah. And then not much happens in the next couple episodes. It's just sort of that like back and forth, cutesy, seeing them from across the room kind of stuff. We get a lot of Chilton and stuff with Richard, especially, and sort of like, oh, and obviously the deer hunters incident in the next few episodes. So Dean takes a back seat until Cinnamon's wake, which, you know, we had this conversation where we were kind of talking about how he comes up to her at the wake and apologizes for being too forward and bugging her. And, you know, he's like, you're clearly not interested. I'll stop bugging you now. And then Rory says she's interested and just runs away. You know, like, what did you think about that? Like, what does that say about their relationship?
You and I both know that I have thoughts on this. There's a part of me that really wants to be able to give Dean the benefit of the doubt here, and I will to an extent because he is a teenage boy. However, I do think there was some reverse psychology that was coming into play here where he was wanting things to progress with Rory. She was not responding in the way that he was necessarily wanting her to, or things were not progressing as fast as he wanted them to. And I think he sort of said what he said to try and elicit a response from her, as if to say, yes, I am interested. So he kind of devil's advocated it to say, like, oh, I know you're not interested, so I'll just stop bothering you now. I'll leave you alone, to see what she would say. And she could have gone one of two ways, as if to say, like, okay, yes, thank you, goodbye. But I think that he knew that she was interested and just wasn't responding as quickly as she wanted him to. So that was his way of kind of getting her to that point. But that's forced and manipulative, whether you're doing it at the age of 16, whether you're doing it at the age of 32, which I think Max does something similar as well. And we'll get to that. I don't love how just off color that felt, with him trying to elicit a response from her that maybe she wasn't even ready to give yet. And it's not the first instance that we see Dean doing something like that. So it was not a full red flag for me, but maybe half of one. To just, I didn't like how pushy he was in that moment with trying to get her to emote in a way that she maybe wasn't necessarily ready to do.
I never read it as reverse psychology. I always did kind of read it as him being genuine. I think he was sort of raised with that Midwestern idea of being polite, and, he has had girlfriends before, so maybe he knows a little bit more than Rory. And he just sort of recognized, like, maybe I'm coming on a little too strong, and, it might be making her uncomfortable. I should probably just, say I'm sorry. But that's not to say that he couldn't also have that idea in his mind of, if I frame it as an apology, maybe she'll clarify, and I'll either know whether she likes me, and, like, if she does, then more is the better. I can run with that. But if she doesn't, then I come off looking like the nice guy, or feeling like the nice guy. I don't know that it was like an intentional thing on his part to manipulate her, but it could be like indirectly manipulative in terms of
I don't necessarily, I'm not going to accuse him of formulating that in his mind and being like, yes, this is what I'm going to do, and I am that much of a planner and a manipulator. I don't even think that he fully recognized what he was doing, but he was still doing it, whether he recognized it or not. And we'll talk about this too, how much behavior is excusable at that age and how much isn't.
Right, because he's only 16 at this point. He doesn't have a ton of experience with how to communicate effectively with women, as we'll see. We'll clearly discuss that in some more depth in a little bit too. But so I think it could just be some sort of like maladaptive strategy that can come off to a watcher with more experience as being like, ooh, that wasn't really very healthy, was it? No. Whereas he wouldn't know, because, he's just probably been taught to apologize for things his entire life. And, we do see him give some genuine apologies throughout. And so I think kind of comparing it to later when, for example, when he apologizes to Rory for freaking out over her wanting to spend her day working on her application to Harvard because Paris freaked her out at the, the house building volunteer work. That was, I think, a genuine apology where he realized that he was wrong in being too possessive and jealous, and that he took a moment to realize that he was happy for Rory and excited for her to go to Harvard, and that he just had to sort of like sit back and accept that she can't spend every waking moment with him because there are other important things in her life. And so I compare it to that, and it kind of feels the same, where he's just got this sort of like, aw shucks kind of attitude about it. And I think he really is sort of like, I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable, because again, he's probably been taught to do that. Don't know where he got that from, maybe from his parents, but I thought it was at least partially genuine, with some undertones of like a bit of strategy, maybe.
That's fair. I can get on board with that.
Yeah, but like we can see it as an audience, but he probably couldn't see it.
No. And I mean, it's not the first example of behavior that is questionable. I don't know if you want to touch on something else first or dive right into the first kiss that happens in the market, but I have thoughts on that too. I don't know how you feel on whether that was okay, whether it was cringy.
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts on that. It is played off as it's supposed to be cute, but I wouldn't have wanted that to be my first kiss. Let's just put it that way, where I'm essentially tricked and he just goes for it without even being like, you cool with this? I mean, granted, 2000 wasn't exactly peak time for discussions of consent or depictions of explicit consent on television. But, beyond that, I wouldn't have dug that myself. I would not have pleased me as a 16-year-old to just like have it sprung on me in the market in front of everyone, and it's like a game to him where it's like, pick whichever one and you get whatever soda's in that hand. And I don't know, it just felt really juvenile and unfortunate. And then she goes to Lane and is like, it was perfect. Oh, girl, you know nothing.
Yeah, I agree too. That felt very cringy to me. Rory didn't go into the market even anticipating that a first kiss was going to happen. I think she just went in there wanting to see this boy that she's crushing on and maybe have like a quick conversation and just lay some more groundwork in that way. But she certainly was not going in there expecting to be kissed. And she was very flustered when it did happen. She immediately bolts with the cornstarch and she runs to Lane because she has to vent to her friend and try and have someone to process what just happened. And yeah, she says it was perfect. I think it comes from an admiration over my crush just kissed me, and I'm not really able to immediately recognize why it wasn't necessarily fully okay because he didn't ask. It wasn't something that was, it wasn't like they were ending a first date and winding down like an evening with dinner and you expect that something like that's going to happen. It was just so sudden and random out of nowhere. So I've got to flag Dean on this one for just being non-consensual with a first kiss. There you
go. I did it. I had been looking for red flags on Amazon and couldn't find any that weren't in huge packs or stupidly expensive. So I made my own out of felt and like little flag sticks. So
excellent. We will need that flag so much.
I made one for you too.
I'll get it one of these days.
Yeah, next time we see each other around my birthday, you can get your little red flag.
I'll get my red flag.
Yeah, so now we can signal visually how we feel inside.
Yep.
So yes, that's the first red flag to me as well. Like, I think everything else leading up to this point is like, you could kind of go either way as to whether it was cool or not. But this one felt like it started to cross that line a little bit. It just started to plant the idea in your head that like he is trying to use moves.
Yeah, and it's not sad necessarily. I think it just, but I do feel bad for Rory and Lane not being able to recognize just how not okay that was. And again, it's just because they're both 16, they're both starting to develop attraction to boys and wanting to get into relationships. So they're not going to be on the up and up with what's acceptable behavior, not even on their part, but on the behavior that they should be on the receiving end of. And that's why Rory says, oh, it was perfect. And Lane isn't even able to recognize her own problematic behavior when she runs her hands through Rich's hair at the band practice that they were having. Yeah, so it just goes back to what I said. How much can you excuse bad behavior from teenagers when they don't and aren't able to fully recognize what's consensual, what's not, and how you should be treating a significant other or person that you're interested in?
Yeah, I actually caught something on a recent watch where, right after Lane tells Lorelai what happened at band practice, Lorelai runs her hands through Max's hair. And I'm like, is this a hint that she's also like 16 and, just making the same mistakes as these 16-year-old girls?
Yep.
Yeah.
All
right.
And then I'll just say this before we move on. We even had that great line between Lorelai and Lane where Lane's just like, he has really good hair. And Laura's like, yeah, he does.
Yeah. Good point. Okay. I was going to move us on to Lorelai's reaction to finding out that Rory got kissed in the supermarket. She had to find out from Mrs. Kim, of all people. Normally, Rory and Lorelai are so good at talking to each other about these things. And Rory was about to tell her mom when she had the, issue with the fridge.
Yep.
And just was having a rough day. And so Rory didn't want to, drop that kind of news on Lorelai when she was having a rough time. But then, so she finds out from Mrs. Kim, and then she goes to the supermarket to stalk Dean. And Luke shows up, and she's like, that Lothario, kissed my daughter. And she has this sort of like really negative reaction. And Luke talks her down off the ledge a little bit. And she compares him to Christopher, for one, which...
Freud.
Freud. Yeah, if you quote Freud at me, like... Yeah, that's a good line. And then she talks to Luke about, like, why didn't she tell me? And I just wanted her to tell me. I need to show her that I'm okay with this. So she invites Dean to movie night. So what's your take on Lorelai inviting Dean? Did she do it to be a pal and to prove to Rory that, like, she's cool with this? Or do you think she had ulterior motives? Like, did she just want to snoop and get some intel on this guy and on this relationship before it even really gets started? Was she really thinking of Rory in this moment? Or was she, like, subconsciously trying to have control over the environment where they kind of had their first date?
I'm gonna call Lorelai out here on some serious ulterior motives. She was definitely thinking of herself in that moment. Yep, just, you can raise it again if you want to. But yep, there it is. I think I don't even think in her mind that she was doing it to necessarily try and be a pal. I think Lorelai was she knew what she was doing. She just wanted intel on Rory and Dean's relationship. And if her daughter was not being forthcoming, this was the only way that she was going to be able to garner any sort of information. I mean, we have a scene where she's sitting in the diner and she sees Rory and Lane sitting at the table dressed up in their little pilgrim outfits, obviously gushing over boys and, relationship talk. And so she knows that her daughter has been pursuing things with Dean and is investing in that relationship, but she's confused as to why Rory isn't coming to her when they've always had that bond and that level of communication with one another. So I think the invite to have Dean come over and join them for movie night stems from her just needing an inside track at that point and just wanting information for herself on how serious is this, what's going on. I don't think she was trying to be a pal for Rory. I think it was a very self-centered move on her part, just from wanting to know what was happening within that relationship. And Rory's response, just being completely bewildered by why her mother would do it is appropriate. I would never want my first date as a teenager to be in the company of my mother, let alone anybody else, but like my mother. And so now she calls Lorelai out on it and says, I have to do this and you're going to be there. And thankfully the date ends up going well enough, but I don't like what Lorelai did there. And I think it was really wrong of her to invite Dean over in that way and put her daughter in a really precarious situation that could have ended the entire relationship had it that evening not gone well.
Yeah, it was very uncomfortable. But like, yeah, something occurred to me with this one where like Lorelai said it to Luke that she just wanted to be a pal, but I think she was just trying to deny her true intentions because of what it would mean to her psychologically, because I think she was kind of equating it in her mind to being like trying to insert herself into Rory's love life, like Emily tried to insert herself into her love life. So it felt too like close to home. And Rory calls her out on this when they were having the conversation about her inviting him in the first place. And she's like, because you're my mother. And she's like, I hate it the way you're saying it like that. Like there should be another word after it. And she's like, what if Lane had done it? She's like, well, you're not Lane, you're my mother. And so, yes, they have a special relationship that's, more friend than mother-daughter. But Rory points out the difference between Lorelai doing it and Lane doing it. And yeah, it's interesting. Rory pushes back against Lorelai's involvement here. And it does put her more in that Emily camp in this situation. But, in the end, she at least does try to support Rory and give her some advice, good advice, I would say, in the lead up to this date, because Rory is freaking out. She doesn't know what to wear. She's like, you know, you do that hair flip and you leave guys speechless, essentially. You know, like, you have this easy charm with men, and, you know, trig I can do, but dating and boys, forget it. Like, I can't do that. And Lorelai helps talk her down off that ledge and gets her to feel a little more comfortable, gives her the advice on, you know, just a little mascara and some flavored lip gloss, wink, wink. I think that's, like, you know, pretty good supportive advice for your 16-year-old daughter. You know, she runs with it. She realizes that she put Rory in an uncomfortable position and just tries to make the best out of it. And, you know, then she does kind of beg off during the date. And, you know, Rory and Dean have that little chat, and she comes into the kitchen being like, what are you doing? Like, aren't you supposed to be a chaperone? She's like, I was trying to be a girlfriend. And then Rory's like, well, you know,
get back in there.
Like, change tack because I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that was always surprising to me how, you know, flummoxed she was with not wanting her mother to be a part of her first date. But then towards the end of it, she recognizes and has that moment of just like, oh, actually, I think I need my mother to, like, you know, throw me an audible on this one because I'm feeling a little bit uncomfy right now. So get back in there and talk to him. And I'm going to go to the bathroom and wash my face. And
yeah,
Lorelai has to come back in. But that leads us to another great scene between Lorelai and Dean. And I wanted to ask what your thoughts on that were. When Lorelai is essentially not railroading Dean, but kind of giving him a warning as if to say, you better not hurt this girl because not only will I come after you, but this town will come after you with pitchforks and torches. How did you feel about Lorelai's conversation with Dean in that moment? And do you think it was appropriate?
Oh, okay. Well, question of whether it's appropriate feels like a tough one. I mean, should any parent ever do that? I don't know. I get it, you know. It has that vibe of, like, the father protecting his daughter with the shotgun a little bit, which, not a huge fan. But I actually kind of like Dean's response to it, where he's like, can I talk now? Like, is it my turn? And he matches Lorelai, you know? Like, he shows that he's not really afraid of her, and he's just like, I need you not to hate me, because he recognizes that if Lorelai doesn't like him, then he doesn't have a shot in hell with Rory. And so I give Dean props for holding his own and standing up to her and showing her that he's in this and he doesn't intend to hurt Rory. He really likes her. All he wants is a shot with her. So I, you know, question aside of Lorelai's approach to it, I think it was a good scene. And it was like, I'll take one red flag point out of the Dean column for his response to it, because it showed his genuine interest and affection.
But she's not going to ride your motorcycle.
I don't have a motorcycle.
But she's not going to ride your motorcycle.
She's not going to ride my motorcycle.
Yeah.
It's a good little scene.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, did you think it was appropriate on Lorelai's part to do that?
No, I don't think it was. I think it didn't come across as threatening in a way that had Dean immediately bolting for the front door and running for the hills and heading back home. And I'll agree with what you said. I would give Dean a point in, like, you know, the positive check bonus column, that he handled it well. And he took what Lorelai had to say. He listened, he responded, and he was able to recognize that, yeah, like, I need the mother's approval here. I know the town cares about her a lot, but just know that I think that I'm presenting myself as a good guy. I do believe myself to be a good person. So I will be taking care of her and having her best interests at heart. So please don't worry about that. So yeah, I took issue with Lorelai being as forceful as she was, but that's always the bond that she and Rory have had. So I understand the protective nature, even if it didn't translate and come across in a very healthy way.
Right. Okay. So we're kind of on the same page there, which is good.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move ahead in time a little bit and talk about the one. Why does Dean think he's too cool to go to a school dance and wear a shirt and tie? Oh God. boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't love how he initially just puts a clamp on it and says, like, no, that's not really something that I want to do. And it takes Rory just kind of looking desolate almost and really just saddened by his response. And he notices it and then he says, oh, well, this means a lot to you, doesn't it? So I guess I'll go. I don't know how to feel there. I want to, again, perhaps give Dean a point for recognizing that it meant a lot to Rory, and that he was going to have to suck it up and go. But at the same time, him immediately being so dismissive of something that she was bringing up as an event that she really wanted to go to also didn't strike me. It goes back to what you said. Why do you think that you're better? Or I don't know if you think that you're better than that or that you're too cool for it. But he was not even willing to listen to what she had to say and just shut it down until he realized how disheartened she looked. So I don't love that moment. And I think he should have been a better listener and a better communicator in terms of picking up what that meant to her.
I mean, in his defense, Rory was kind of dancing around it, and she wouldn't even tell him what it was. She's like, it's this event where you kind of like get dressed up and you go somewhere and then there's chicken. She plays it off as something. She's like, I could do it or I could not do it. Mm-hmm. So, he does at least say honestly, like, it's not really how I ever want to spend my time in general, but like, I can see that it means something to you. And at least he does acquiesce. So, but yeah, it did feel a smidge. Again, I don't want to use the word manipulative because I don't think that's what he was going for.
I don't know.
Like now, because he's agreeing to go, that like Rory owes him something for it, like maybe an afternoon of battle bots or something. But it's the same phenomenon we have in presenting Lorelai Gilmore, where she has to show him videos of Neil Young in a tux to get him to like wear tails to her coming out party. Like, what is it with the teenage boys? Like, come on, tuxes look great, suits look great, look sharp, boys. Take note. Women love that.
It's attractive.
It's attractive. I don't know why you're fighting that. Not to mention, it's like, you like this girl and she's like asking you to spend a fancy evening with her. Like, this is your opportunity to show her that, it's your opportunity to shine. Show her what you've got and like show her you can clean up nice. So enough with the hesitation.
I don't want to believe that Dean is overly manipulative, but we even see that like he does it even on a more basic level of things where, he reads a book that Rory wants him to read and he's like, okay, so now you need to read Hunter Thompson. It's like, again, that's very nuanced and basic and there's nothing wrong there. But I think it's just a tell of like, I do something for you, you do something for me. And that seems to be Dean's MO more often than not, which can translate into really problematic behavior when it goes beyond just reading books that you want the other person to read.
Yeah, there is a bit of a tit for tat with their relationship. Like you can see it in Love and War and Snow when she brings him the Rocky Road cookies. And he's like, how will you ever repay me? How about some Jane Austen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels a little too transactional. Yeah. And that's not how relationships are supposed to be. You're supposed to, try to get involved in things that are important to your partner because you genuinely care for them and you want to spend time with them and you want to understand them. So the whole like, if you do this for me, I'll give you cookies.
Yeah.
Feels juvenile.
It is juvenile. It's unhealthy. And I would hope that it would be a behavior that they both can recognize and correct. Don't think they ever do. But I think that also in Rory's case stems from not having a parental role model that really ever instilled healthy relationship bullet points from the get-go. So they were both just floundering and trying to go through this, not really knowing what's acceptable behavior and how they should be treating one another. But that's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get there. Okay, moving on to the dance itself. Again, I gotta pull out the red flag for Dean's behavior with Tristan.
You can wave both of them because I would be waving mine too if I had it.
All right, proxy flag waving for both of us on this one because yes, Tristan was the antagonist here and was trying to rile him up on purpose. But I do not like what Dean did. Like, because I'll kill you, idiot, is just not the appropriate way to respond to that.
Nope.
Least of all at a school function.
Nope.
But not in general. Like, I don't like the aggression I saw there. And it sort of sets the tone for some of the other moments in the future where he just has trouble seemingly controlling his anger. He does, luckily for him, I have noticed a bit of a pattern where he will get really angry and will sort of like, you know, get that sort of flood of emotion. But once he's able to step back and reflect on things, he is able to sort of calm that down and have more rational thoughts, which is, you know, that's a good strategy to have, is to like remove yourself from the situation and process alone and not get to that place of aggression. Like you see it in, if anyone's a How I Met Your Mother fan, Lily and Marshall have this this strategy where if they're fighting, they pause and, you know, mostly they have sex, but sometimes they just, you know, go their separate ways and do things. And they continue the fight later when, you know, it's not the heat of the moment anymore. And that's actually a pretty healthy coping mechanism, to step back, process your own feelings, and then you can come back fresh without that like fight or flight response. So at least Dean seems to be able to do that at times. So he has these moments of scary aggression, but he does walk himself back and reflect more so than a lot of teenage boys probably would. So we get that. But it's a really uncomfortable scene where he's, you know, threatening Tristan.
Yeah. Toxic masculinity much? I mean, I can understand where Dean is coming from, because Tristan can be a real D-bag a lot of the times, and just way too cocky and forward and arrogant. And he definitely was never respective of Rory's relationship with Dean before and after he even knew about it. But it's even more problematic once he knows about it, and he's still not respective of the fact that Rory is taken, has a boyfriend, is no longer available, but keeps pushing, and even pushes more so in the presence of Dean at this Chilton function. So I can understand Dean's response just being like, this guy's a jerk. I don't want him around my girlfriend because he's not respective of her space and the boundary that she's trying to set forth here and our relationship. But Dean's response is also very problematic, not warranted, and troubling, where he does reach that level of aggression and says that line, as you indicated, "I'll kill you, you idiot." If I was Rory, I would really be taking stock of that and saying, why is my boyfriend being so aggressive and responding in this way? I think that's something that I'm going to have to address with him, because that behavior can translate into problems within the relationship. If there's that underlying aggression that's there, it doesn't necessarily mean that Rory would be out of the woods from being on the receiving end of that aggression down the line. And that's even a scarier thing to think about. So it's worth noting. And if I was Rory, I'd really be questioning who I'm dating at that point, and what is the personality of this individual actually like, because I've never seen that side before.
Yeah. And I think that kind of brings us to the next big thing that we need to talk about, because I definitely want to keep us moving ahead in time. The 3-month anniversary. Yeah. So, one, I don't think it was a good idea for a 16-year-old boy to give a girl a car for a 3-month anniversary. I think that sets the bar a little too high. And they kind of joke about that in the show. Like, what's the 4-month anniversary?
A yacht.
Yeah, pretty much. Spaceship? I don't know. So like that felt inappropriate. It's just this, you know, grand gesture that's way above and beyond where they should be in their lives or their relationship. And we have him saying, "I love you" at 3 months in, and then just losing it when she doesn't reciprocate. It's really like, it goes to prove just how immature and naive they are with this, because like you can tell that he put a lot of thought and effort into this date, and that he had probably built up all these expectations in his head of this grand romantic moment where he expresses his love and she says it back and they embrace, and, you know, just that romantic movie trope. And it doesn't happen, and he lashes out. He, you know, takes jabs at her and says like, "What, do you need to consult your mother? Do you need to make one of your pro-con lists?" Hey, pro-con lists work for everything, okay? You do not mock the scientificity of our pro-con lists. So
I'll agree there, but
yeah, just so immature, and it proves to me that neither of them know what love is. It's just, you know, his thinking is too black and white.
Yep.
You know, it's not, you know, it's something you feel. Either you feel it or you don't. That's not how love works. Like, love is a choice. It's something you consistently choose to do. It's actions. It's, you know, giving grace to your partner when they're not perfect or when they're not like exactly eye to eye with you. And he's too young to recognize that. And he just goes off the handle and shuts down.
Yeah, I mean, the night is immediately over as soon as she won't reciprocate those feelings. He's like, oh, well, I guess I'll just take you home then. Why don't you talk to her? Like, spend a little more time understanding where she's coming from and why she's not at that point yet where she can tell you that she loves you back. Try to understand her emotions, her headspace at that point, where her mind's at, and just be compassionate and understand that her feelings for you haven't changed. She still cares about you, but not everyone is going to get to that stage at the same point of being able to not even say those words, but also say them and mean them. And that's also something worth noting, that I agree, Dean threw those words out there, and I don't really think he was genuine about them. I don't think he loved Rory, because I don't think he knew what love was at that point. But for her to not be able to respond, and for him to be so inconsiderate and uncompassionate that she can't reciprocate those feelings, it's very toxic. And again, it's a moment where if I was Rory, I would be questioning, what kind of relationship do I have with this person? Is it worth continuing on if they can't allow me the space that I need to process my own emotions and to get to the point of just establishing the love that we both would want to have for one another? So super red flag for Dean. I think that's one of the biggest ones that we can throw out there throughout the course of the entire show. I think the only other bigger one would just be when they end up sleeping together and
spoilers.
Dean's a married, spoilers. They end up sleeping together while Dean's a married man. But yeah, Dean's was just nothing about that was okay here. And I really despise him for that moment. And Rory's response was just to try and like apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. If you're not ready to confront that yet or verbalize those emotions or those feelings and you need more time, take it. That's well within your right. You don't owe anybody an apology for that. So it was just such a horrible and heartbreaking scene to have to watch.
Yeah, he really doesn't validate her feelings or empathize with her at all, which is really important in conflict. And, you know, he gets too accusatory of her instead of taking that step back and being like, okay, why does she feel this way? And listening and understanding when she says, look at my life with my mom. Like, you know, she got pregnant at 16. She said she loved my dad, and look what happened to them. You know, it's just not that easy for me. And she's right. You know, she hasn't had healthy modeling from a stable, like, relationship in her life to feel confident in knowing what those feelings are like. And, you know, like you said, she sort of like apologizes and says, please don't be mad, which is something that she says a lot. She just shuts it down and tries to invalidate other people's feelings as a way to avoid conflict. She just, again, invalidates his feelings in the moment as well by saying, please don't be mad. Like, you have no right to be mad. In a way, like, she's not wrong that he doesn't really have a right to be mad, but invalidating his feelings in that moment isn't going to help anything. And that's why he lashes out at her. And you're right. She doesn't owe him an apology or an explanation. But, you know, it fans the flames.
Yep.
Ironically, because they can't get the firelight pyre lit in this episode. God, I love that moment. Does anybody have a match? Every year. Yeah. So it just makes him uncommunicative. He kind of low-key stonewalls her a little bit. and refuses to engage anymore. He just says, like, we're done here. I'm taking you home. And then he actually apologizes, but I don't think he does so genuinely in this instance. Like, this is why I'm like, you can kind of tell when he's being genuine and when he's not, because he just sort of says, like, you know, I'm sorry, I don't know what I was thinking, which to me comes off as like, I shouldn't have even said anything because now I feel like an idiot. It wasn't a genuine apology of like, I'm sorry I put you in this uncomfortable position and I'm sorry that you don't reciprocate my feelings right now. And so again, immaturity, you really don't know what love is.
Yeah.
And yet here you are trying to pretend like you know, and like this is the end all be all of love for you. So I just, yeah, it's interesting. And then on top of it, Rory goes home and tells Lorelai about it and takes zero accountability. Like, she just sort of like blames it on Dean, lets her mom blame Dean, lets the town blame Dean. She never tells them the real story because she can't reckon with her own emotions. She can't let herself feel the guilt of what she did to him. She just won't process it. And so then we come into the next episode and she's just, you know, trying to do anything to distract herself. So just, again, unhealthy coping mechanism.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and it's telling too when even down the line Lorelai learns what really happened that night. And you see how sympathetic she becomes to Dean when he tells her the true story of how everything went down. And she realizes, like, oh, this wasn't just Dean being a jerk. Like, Rory had a part to play here. And the care that she elicits to Dean in that moment, just saying, like, you must have been feeling really hurt that night too, because the both of you did things wrong. It's telling. Rory was not Stars Hollow's angel here. And the picture that she painted for her mom in the town was false. And I've got to dock her for that too.
Yeah, just so bad. So bad. I guess that sort of brings us to P.S. I Love, when Lorelai goes to the Gilmore house after Rory runs away and says, you know, I hate to think that I raised a kid who couldn't say I love you. And, you know, I'm still figuring all of this out myself. And in that, I never really thought about what I should be teaching you. So it just goes to show that Rory didn't have this explained or shown to her in any manner. And it makes sense why she's so ill-equipped for this relationship early on. She gets a little better once she sort of like has that time to process her feelings. And, you know, I think the kiss with Tristan at the party really solidifies how hurt she was and how deeply she cared for him, which took a little time, but eventually I think brought her back to him. So yeah, just at least Lorelai acknowledges, oh, hey, probably should have told my daughter how emotions work and how to handle them.
Yeah, but she can't because she's not fully up to speed on that herself. And I think this is perhaps a good time for us to transition into talking about her and Max and why that relationship also mirrors Rory and Dean's in a lot of way with the immaturity levels that were there. But I think we can move on to that and start breaking that down a little bit more.
Yeah, so that requires us to take a step back in time, back to Cinnamon's wake, because we talked at length about her relationship with Max in our entire episode on him. Yep. So one thing we didn't really touch on as much was her first date with him, where it was sort of like, we're testing the waters. We don't want to commit to fully going on a date and getting stuck with each other. So like, why don't we meet in Hartford casually for coffee? And that scene is interesting. So
to say the least.
Yeah. What was your take on that scene? Like what stood out about that to you?
It wasn't on the up and up for me. And I think it mirrored a lot of what Dean did with Rory in terms of perhaps reverse psychology. But we have this scene where they're in the coffee shop. The attraction is both there from both of them. They both genuinely want to try and pursue something. But I think Max is a little more upfront about it, where he even says, like, you know, I think we should date. And Lorelai's like, well, why? And he's like, because we're attracted to each other, which lends itself to one of the best lines in the show, where she's just like, I'm attracted to pie. It doesn't mean I need to date pie. Like, but that was her way of saying, like, give me something more. There needs to be more of a reason for us to start a new relationship with each other beyond like just a physical attraction. We really don't know each other well at this point. Why do you want to date me? Like, what more are you seeing here that you think lends itself to this, something that could be successful for us? And Max kind of, in my mind, tells like this just hoo-ha story of, you know, oh, my uncle, you know, met this woman and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, then it worked out well for them. But like, you know, what would have happened if it hadn't? And I just feel like whether that story was true or not, he was kind of doing something similar to what Dean did, where you're trying to elicit a response from her as if to say, like, well, if you don't want to date me, like, I guess I'll just go on my merry way and like we don't have to continue on with this. And trying to get Lorelai to confront emotions and verbalize that, like, okay, yeah, we can try and sort this out and move forward with it and see if we're compatible. But it felt like Max was being a bit too forceful to get Lorelai to that moment instead of just letting her get there on her own. And I think she would have. And, you know, maybe even if it took another week or so of coffee dates and conversations to say, like, okay, let's actually go on a real first date with one another, I think Lorelai would have gotten there, but Max was pushing her to get there faster. And that's what I didn't like about it.
Yeah, this one is manipulative. He was trying to manufacture emotion in her by telling her a story that would get her reaching for the Kleenex. You know, he's telling about the one who got away as if, like, you know, we really shouldn't let this pass us by because clearly there's something here. And you're right. I think listing attraction as the number one reason why they should date is incredibly juvenile. Like, that's only the baseline, buddy. Like, you gotta give me more than that. So yeah, and then they have that whole back and forth after that about you know, so do you like do you like rap music? Yeah, me too. Italian food? Yeah, me too. You just telling me what I want to hear? Yeah.
Yep.
Like,
wave the flag. Wave the flag.
Big no-no. Like, you do not hide who you are on a first date in order for there to be a second date. Like,
yeah, and she calls him out on it because she says, if you're telling me what I want to hear, I'm not getting to know the real you. And his comeback is, well, I'm telling you that, you know, because it just means that I'm taking an interest in, you know, wanting to learn more about you until you own it. It's just like, no.
Yeah.
You're just
like, I understand you.
Yeah, that I understand you. And it's just like, you don't. You're telling her what she wants to hear because you think it will allow for success. But you're not building compatibility. You're just being false and lying. And oh my gosh, I just,
It goes back to our point in our Max episode where we said he's just a yes man.
Yep. Big yes man.
And then the other thing he says to me that's really interesting, I don't think that came out right. The other thing he says that's really interesting to me is how he says, you know, Lorelai brings up the concern about Rory. And he says, well, you know, why don't you just put her in a box and blow smoke on her, stunt her growth? And one, that feels kind of underhanded, you know.
A little bit.
Again, just sort of like poking the bear. But I also think he did have maybe a bit of a point. Like, do you think that Lorelai stunted Rory's growth in the way that she behaved with men throughout Rory's early life?
Yes. And I don't think that she meant to. I don't think that was ever her intention, but I think that she did. Lorelai was never able to have healthy relationships with men after Christopher, really until she gets to Luke. And even that one has a lot of unhealthy moments within it too. But as Rory's entering the dating scene, she's not able to process emotions well with Dean. She can't verbalize why she needs more time to think about how she's feeling and work through that. But it continues on even after she breaks up with Dean, and even as she gets into relationship with Jess, with Logan, as she heads into her early to mid 20s, she's still really having problems with establishing healthy boundaries and knowing what is acceptable behavior within relationships. I will say one of Rory's finer moments is when she professes down the line, spoiler, again, her love to Logan, and she's able to say, I'm saying this to you, but I don't need to immediately hear it back if you're not ready. And I think she learned that from what she had with Dean, knowing that if someone's not ready to say it back to you, you need to be okay with that and know that it doesn't mean that they care any less, but you just need to give them time. But that was a skill that she had to learn on her own. It was never something that was imbued upon her by Lorelai. I don't think she ever really had any relationship skills that she learned from Lorelai, and everything was always just something that she had to figure out on her own. And that's really hard when you don't have parental influence to try and guide you through it. And I think that's why she was never really able to have a healthy relationship ever, I think, at all that we see within the show.
Yeah, she got closest with Logan, I would say. But she screwed that up big time. Yeah. So, but yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I too think that, you know, both of them were sort of stunted. And in a lot of ways, Lorelai was sort of stuck at 16 herself mentally because, you know, I mean, you get a lot of skills and stuff from working and whatnot. You learn a lot about yourself and about life in the world, but it's a very different type of knowledge, social skills, all that kind of stuff. You learn a lot in college, I think. When you're, you know, you're young and unattached and you're dating around and all that kind of stuff. And so I think there were a lot of relational skills that Lorelai missed out on building by having Rory so young and not going to college in the traditional sense, and having that kind of experience. So she just sort of had to skip ahead to being mom without getting to know herself better. And I think that puts her really behind. And that's why at 32, she's having a very similar relationship to her 16-year-old daughter. There's a lot that she missed and doesn't know about how to, like you said, draw boundaries and to engage in a mature way. She just thinks that she should be at a very particular place in her life. You know, she's in her 30s. She wants a serious relationship. You know, as the mom in the scenario, she needs to be very careful about what she does in her relationship. She has a higher level of investment that she needs to meet in order to have a relationship with a man, because doing so will bring someone into this very small, very tight family unit, very complicated family unit as well. And so she just kind of jumps at the first chance without stepping back to realize what this is going to mean for her in the long run. And yeah, it's very like Rory, where, you know, this is Rory's first relationship. She's testing the waters. She's learning what it's like. And Lorelai's doing a lot of the same things, but in a time in her life when she's expected to get married. And this is what Max wants. And Max is trying to push her for these things she's not ready for. And he acknowledges that later. He recognized it eventually. She just sort of backslid when he returned, which is unfortunate. So yeah, I don't even know where I was going with that, but
I'm sorry.
Lorelai is 16. That's where I was going with that.
Yeah. And even at she's a 32-year-old woman trapped in a 16-year-old teenager's mindset and body. And she was never, even with Max, able to really recognize what love was, because I still think at that point she didn't know, and she didn't know how to recognize it. And I don't think, maybe Max did a little bit better too, but their relationship was just built on this idealization of loving what I have with this person, but not loving the person themselves. And so that relationship was never going to work. But that's something that we've already talked about within the Max episode. What's interesting to me, and something that I want to talk about now, is just how Rory and Max interacted with each other, and how that kind of parallels how Lorelai and Dean were able to interact with each other, where you're communicating and having a relationship with your mother and or daughter's significant other, and how that goes. And I think there are parallels there that can be drawn too.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But the dynamic is so different because, you know, Lorelai is the one with the power in the relationship with Dean, and Rory is very much in a position as, you know, the younger, inexperienced person. And also, this guy is her teacher. We said it a ton in that episode. This guy is her teacher. So not only is he, you know, on the deck as potential stepdad, which has a power differential to it, but in her school life, there's a very stark contrast there. And so Rory doesn't have the same kind of power that Lorelai does in controlling her interactions with Max. But you could see her resisting it at first, but then ultimately accepting him and being like, why don't we invite Max to go skating with us? And she really gets on board, and she puts in the work to appreciate this new relationship for her mother, which is nice. And it's funny how Rory gets even more closure with Max than Lorelai does when it first ends. So I think that speaks to, the attempts for Rory to have some more emotional growth than Lorelai was able to get.
Yeah, I love the scenes that we get, and especially with Rory and Max. I feel like they were all too brief. When he gets brought back in season 3, just everything that we get from him just feels like you're trying to give your audience some closure, but you're not even giving your characters necessarily the closure that they need. But one of my favorite scenes was always the one at the end of the day where Rory is sitting in the classroom with Max and just says, like, I really wanted you to be my stepfather. And Max says, I really wanted to be your stepfather. Like, that pulled at my heartstrings because they both genuinely came to care about one another and could see each other being family, and they never got it. And it wasn't, especially for Rory, like it wasn't her fault, but she was just a bystander who got affected by this. So that was one thing. But I think it parallels almost sort of a similar closure that we get with Lorelai and Dean, because even after that relationship ends, Lorelai still makes a point to talk to Dean and say, like, listen, what happened with you and Rory happened with you and Rory, but like, I don't want there to be bad blood between us, and I still want us to be friends and maintain some sort of relationship if we can. And Dean says, yeah, I'd really like that too. So both just really good moments that I think somewhat reflect each other, that just show us that even when relationships fail, you can still have perhaps a healthy and normal friendship with, your daughter, your mother's partner, even when it doesn't work out. So I love the effort that was made there on both parties.
Yeah, that's a really good catch. I like that. Like, I remember that happening, but like to think about them, how like they both made an effort to get that closure. That's nice.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of on the flip side with the becoming family thing, Dean was Rory's first boyfriend. I don't think Lorelai ever really saw it going the distance. I think she recognized Dean for what he was, which was a good first boyfriend.
Yeah.
But I don't think she had the same attachment to him that Rory was able to develop for Max, where she really thought that, her mom was going to marry this guy and that they were going to be a unit. So a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah. I mean, how many of us, if at all, end up ever marrying high school sweethearts?
I'm so glad I didn't.
Abysmally low. I say abysmally low. Like, I'll say, like, it can work. And I know there are, I'm sure out there in the world, people who meet a high school sweetheart and end up marrying their first significant other, and it works out well and they have a lovely life together. But the actual percentage of people who end up marrying high school sweetheart, significant other, whatever nomenclature you want to use, is low. And I think there's a reason for it. Your first relationship is always foundational and a good building block, but it always just is there, I think, to, for the most part, just allow you to really explore what you need and want in a partner, what you're going to settle for, what you're going to appreciate, what you're not going to love, so that in your relationships going forward, you know what you need to be looking out for, and you don't have to necessarily waste your time in that way exploring what your first relationship already allowed you to learn.
Yeah, it's interesting because, your first relationships are usually in your teens, right? And they're really intense because your hormones are just raging. And something that we don't often think about is the impact of hormones on the consolidation of memories. And so we always remember our first loves as being more intense than a lot of other things because of that. And so, I think that's kind of why Rory always gravitates to Dean later, because he was the first person that she had those feelings for, and it really sticks with her. And I think it's the same reason that Lorelai also gravitates to Christopher. Not only did she have her normal teen raging hormones, but then she had the pregnancy hormones, which only made things worse. And so I think that's why we get them coming back together and her ultimately being like, you're the one I want to want, but like, I just can't get there with you because, you know, they have that history and that intense emotional connection that's real and it's there, but it's not right for them. So it's just, it's interesting. And like, Rory's not done developing yet. You know, her prefrontal cortex hasn't even finished cooking. So it really impacts her ability to think clearly and to make decisions and to have that sort of forward looking thing. Right now, everything is just intense emotion. And Lorelai is able to sort of think ahead a little bit in a way that Rory can't in her early interactions with Max, where she's so hesitant because she's like, I can see what's going to happen now. You know, I can see this playing out poorly. So another little interesting difference between them is that sort of like teen brain versus adult brain conversation.
Yeah. And again, Lorelai never really even had an adult brain in terms of relationship goals and boundaries, I think, even until Luke. And I think it was largely Luke stepping in from a mature standpoint to allow her to recognize what was going to be good for her and what wasn't, which is probably one of the reasons why he ended up being the right guy for her at the end of the day. But it's devastating to me that they both had to go through such horrendous relationships and such heartbreak to really, especially, I mean, in Rory's case, we don't see her necessarily finding her person yet. Lorelai does, but the path that they had to take to get there was not an easy one. And it was rocky, and there were a lot of tears and heartbreak, and it's not an uncommon thing. I think that's normal for quite a lot of us going through relationships until you find that right one, but it's just the road you have to travel down to learn what's right for you and what you need.
Yeah. It's interesting how they both backslide to their teen loves and how it plays out poorly both times. But like, I do think that coming back to someone you loved in your teens as an adult could actually work sometimes. Like that's what happened to my mom, you know, after like relationships going poorly, she eventually reconnected with someone from her early days. And, you know, again, they both kind of had to go through it in their middle lives to get to that place. But at least now they understand more, and that's why the relationship works, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, the Christopher thing could maybe have worked, but I think that there was too many differences between them, and there were some stumbling blocks that they specifically couldn't get over. But in general, I would say that, you know, once you've matured, you could always sort of go back to someone if it's really meant to be fate again. You know, it's not impossible. It can be done. But,
it can.
In their cases, it was not a good idea to do that.
No. And again, I just think Rory going back to Dean and the travesty that unfolds there with, you sleep with a married man. Like, oh, we'll get there when we talk about relationships and battle of the boyfriends, and we'll touch on that, I'm sure, in so many episodes to come. But that being said, I want to contrast and ask you this. We've been talking about a lot of relationships within the show that are problematic, that had issues. Were there ever any healthy relationships within the show that you saw between any two people that you thought were just, these two people are doing it right, and they're actually on the right track here in ways that we don't see a lot of our other characters being?
I could see some people making a case for Emily and Richard, but I still think that there was a lot of crap in their relationship, which we'll get to when we talk about them and their character deep dive. But I think like the one that really stands out to me as being pretty much the only healthy relationship on the show was Suki and Jackson.
Yeah.
They got each other and just loved each other. They understood. They were, again, sort of in their 30s. We don't know exactly how old they were or what their dating histories look like. Although we do know that Jackson like spread his seed around. Nice gardening metaphor, Suki.
Yep.
But other than that, like, we don't really know much about their exact ages or what they've gone through up until this point. And we don't really have to. All we need to know is that like they really found each other. And you know, every relationship has a little bit of conflict. We can see some of that with them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's mostly like over stupid stuff, like whether or not they could get a radish up Davy's nose. So I think in general they were the best adjusted.
Yeah, I do think that throughout all of the relationships we see in the show that they embodied the healthiest one, that their love was pure and genuine for one another. It wasn't built on something false or an idealization. And I think that's why they worked out well in the way that we see them in the show, and just why I've always been personally drawn to what I've seen within their relationship. Is just, I love their scenes together and their interactions as they get to know each other as boyfriend, girlfriend, as they go on their bit of basket date, as everything unfolded with them. It was just really heartwarming because I think you could tell that they were doing it right and everything was just like genuine in a way that a lot of other relationships that we were seeing on the show were failing. So it was a nice black and white sort of dichotomy to have, to see a relationship going well where we really don't get that any other time on the show.
Yeah. I mean, they had a few problems with communication at times, like the fact that Jackson had to sort of like dance around the fact that he wanted her to move in with, or that he wanted to move in with her rather, like, you know, give up his bachelor pad and move into her house. And then ends up proposing. Not the best at all communication wise, but you're right. They, you know, were both at a phase in their life where they were on the same page in a way that Lorelai and Max were not in their 30s. Mm-hmm. So they at least had a more solid foundation than some of our other couples. And they didn't have nearly as many issues with toxicity like Emily and Richard, for example. Mm-hmm. So yeah. But going back to our main characters, mm-hmm. I did want to draw some comparisons between Dean and Max as well, in terms of like the guys that our gals were dating at the same time. And so, you know, I'm going to start with the obvious, like both, I think, I know Team Dean stands out there will disagree with me on this, but they both were not truly the right guys for them. They were good guys in general for the most part, but they didn't have enough of that like je ne sais quoi to hack it with these girls. Like they were not the right match for them in the end. Agree? Disagree?
I agree. And I think that's why Emily makes just a really telling observation where they're having dinner and she notices and is told that Rory is having her 3-month anniversary with Dean. And she kind of, you know, puts her own daughter on the spot and like, you know, just blows up her spot and says, oh, well, that's a longer relationship than you've ever had, isn't it? And Lorelai's just like, what? But she's right. Lorelai hasn't established long-term relationships with somebody that have gone beyond 3 or 6 months at a time. And I think Lorelai is recognizing that with Max, where she's so trepidatious with even giving him a key to the house, with letting him wanting him to come inside. And when she's behaving in this way, I think she's innately noticing that, like, yes, this person is not right for me. And so I need to move on from it. But it's not always easy to do so. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot there too. Dean ends up not being the right person for Rory because I think he was also just perhaps a little bit too pressuring in the same way that Max was. So I agree that both men could have just been, in terms of the Gilmore women, not allowing them to take the time that they need to process emotions and get to where they need to be within a relationship. And there's a lot of overlap there. So, yeah, I agree. Both men were not right for our Gilmore women. And I think in Rory's case, it took her longer to realize with Dean, whereas Lorelai kind of knew it more quickly and was able to move on from Max.
Yeah, out of necessity a little bit, because she was about to legally tie herself to this guy. Yeah. And, you know, it put a little bit of pressure on it, whereas like Dean and Marie didn't have that. But yeah, they were both nice guys on paper who have underlying issues and incompatibilities that make them like red herrings. You know, they were never meant to be the guys, I don't think. So, no. But I just want to like take a brief moment, like step out of this conversation for 1 sec, just to touch on Chase Bradford.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want to have a moment to express how ridiculous that whole thing was. Like the fact that this kind of goes to what I was saying earlier about Emily trying to insert herself, where she invites over this guy who's so clearly wrong for Lorelai, like so wrong for Lorelai. Wrong. And, you know, but he has everything on paper again, in Emily's mind, at least. You know, he comes from a good family. He's got a good job. He fits into the world. But he's just awful. And even Richard recognizes it. Like, at the dinner table, he's talking about how he can pinpoint, like, almost down to the day when you're going to die. Just, oh. And the fact that his family's Dobermans were named after murderers? Like, who? Okay, and then Lorelai also references Leopold and Loeb in Lazy Hazy Crazy Days, and I'm like, why is Amy Sherman Palladino so obsessed with Leopold and Loeb? Like, they were murderers from the 20s who tried to commit the perfect crime to assert their superior intelligence. Are you trying to tell us something about trying to assert your intelligence? I'd like
probably, because again, Amy's a genius, so she would insert that in there.
Yeah. Chases. We'll get to him too, probably a little more when we talk about star-crossed lovers. But yeah, that whole thing just really made Lorelai run right back to Max. She just had this moment where she had to contend with the fact that she had this desire not to be alone, and Max was the only thing in her orbit at the time, and so she defaulted to it. And was like, I need to make this work because I am 32 and my daughter is having her 3-month anniversary. And when can I say I had my last 3-month anniversary? So
yeah,
kind of
but comparing and contrasting is never going to do her any favors. And she should have recognized that too. Chase was definitely some sort of weird representation of what Emily and Richard would have hoped for her to have in terms of the guy that she ended up for. But he was even such a weirdo himself that even they were able to realize, like, oh my gosh, like, actually, I don't want my daughter ending up with this person ever because he's bizarre. But them trying to insert themselves into her life in that way, just again, like what you said, has her running back to Max, even though he's the wrong person, because she is recognizing, like, and I think contending with feelings of feeling like a failure from being in her 30s and not being married or in an established relationship. And it's wrong for her to feel that way because everyone's trajectory in that regard is going to be different. Some people may never get married their entire lives and still just be content with being single and living their own life in that way. Everyone needs to do what's right for them. So for her to hold herself up against her daughter and compare in that way, and also just to try and fit into a relationship with a guy because society tells her, like, oh, you're, you know, aging and you're not married. It's so wrong for her to draw those parallels and try and comport herself into what society expects of her, because it's just shirking her own happiness and her own well-being too.
Yeah, all true. All very true. Okay, the next point of comparison I have for Dean and Max is that they're both romantics at heart who are into big gestures.
Nah.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest gestures worth noting, problematic or otherwise?
The car and the proposal. I think those are the two obvious ones where it's just like, okay, you went a little too big for 3 months, buddy. And okay, on Max's part, you don't propose because you're in the middle of a fight and that's the way to solve your problems. You think it's a nice gesture with 1,000 yellow daisies, but like, wow, no, that's not how that works.
Nope.
So, yeah. And going to that, you know, they were both trying in those moments, trying to force the girls into things that they weren't ready for, saying I love you and saying yes to a marriage proposal, respectively.
Yep.
So,
yeah, it's a parallel that, you know, can be drawn and should be drawn, but it's a negative one in this regard. And we've touched upon it already. You were forcing our Gilmore Girls into situations that they weren't ready for. And you never allowed them the time to breathe, to process their emotions. And it's probably one of the reasons why, amongst all others, that it didn't work out. Because if you had just given them the space and the time that they needed, I don't know, maybe you could have made the argument that it would have for either one of them. But the fact that you were so pushy with trying to get them to where you wanted to be within the relationship, and you kind of made it about you in that way, just completely disacknowledges like them, and just it doesn't allow for their feelings and their emotions to factor in. So when you're going to be that self-centered for lack of a better word, in a relationship, and you're not willing to consider how your partner is feeling, it's going to fail.
Yes, this is true. And, on that note, they sort of like both make exclamations of love at inappropriate times.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Dean says it in the car and Max says it during his proposal. I don't think we've ever heard him say it to her until that moment. And she doesn't say it back to him. Mm-hmm. Eventually, Rory at least says it back to Dean. And we don't hear it fall out of Lorelai's mouth until the end of season 6 to Luke.
Right.
That is the first time on screen. And one of the only times. I think that's literally like the only time in the season.
That's the only time.
The series.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is wild to me. Yeah, and then Dean does this again, I think, with Lindsay. He proposes way, way too early. And it's clearly a rebound from what happened with Rory at that party. And, him proposing at the age of 18 to his girlfriend as like a way to solve a problem is big Max energy.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But Max should even know better. I mean, they both should know better, because at that point, Dean is not a teenager anymore. He's had a few relationships at that point. So he should know better than to try and band-aid a going wrong relationship with just a marriage proposal. But they both misstep, and they try and just hastily rectify a sinking ship of a relationship, just with progressing it further. And sometimes it never ends well. You need to allow a relationship to breathe and even take a break sometimes and give your partner space if that's what's warranted. But hastily trying to rush into something is just going to make it worse, because it's just really inconsiderate of your partner's feelings. So,
yep. Again, all true. Next up that I thought was especially interesting, and it's desynchronized, so you can't necessarily spot it as easily, I don't think, but both of them had Dane's men attempt to interfere somehow in their relationships. We have Jess, both because of unexpressed feelings for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Jess in Bracebridge Dinner trying to question Rory and her relationship with Dean by questioning their compatibility and implying that they weren't really equals and didn't have anything in common. And then we have Luke peppering Lorelai with questions after she reveals that Max asked her to marry him, and implying that she doesn't really know this guy at all, and trying to get her to second guess herself a little bit with this.
Yeah. That's an interesting parallel, and I had never really considered that. So good catch, good spot. But it's also interesting that even though it's, two Danes that intercede in this way, only one ends up still being the right person. So yeah, good parallel there. But yeah, Luke had definitely a lot more going for him than Jess did in terms of just compatibility, and I think just emotional maturity. Which is telling, because I don't know, Luke had his own relationships, but I don't know, enough to get him to the level of maturity that he exhibited. I don't think it was necessarily something that Luke ever learned from relationships. I just think it was a part of his being, that he was always just a really emotionally well-adjusted individual, and that translated well into his relationships, whereas Jess had to contend with that and not being able to process or handle emotions as well. And Luke could be more self-aware with what he was feeling, and Jess perhaps couldn't.
I mean, yes and no. I will fight you on this when we get to break down Luke a little bit more, because there are a lot of things where he is definitely emotionally constipated. But again, season 4, we'll get there. And just sort of going back to what you said about the maturity, again, got to fight you on this, because my next point / last point on this particular comparison is that, both Dean and Jess, both, I don't know how to phrase this, but okay. So, right. So both Jess and Luke have sort of pissing matches against their respective guys. So we have Jess at the Bit a Basket auction and the scuffle with Dean there. And then we have Luke coming in after Rachel leaves, coming back for Bert and having that back and forth with Max about like, you know, I'll always be here, and like you're lucky to even like
exist in this framework.
Yeah, like this isn't gonna last because she and I are meant for each other. So yeah, they both have those sort of moments where they have to assert their dominance over the other guys.
Oh my gosh, what is it with like, I'm sorry, like I don't want to like gender stereotype, but like what is it with dudes with that sometimes? Like you've got to be a little more secure in yourself. Yeah. It'll go a long way for you.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, well I think that sort of brings us to the end, at least of this portion of, you know, comparing Lorelai and Rory to each other and talking about their guys. Yeah. We've got more on, you know, their future relationships, but this is more just like season 1, Dean and Max.
Yeah, we're going to delve a lot more into the red flags, problematic relationships. We're going to have Battle of the Boyfriends episodes, future episodes just on relationships, character studies. We'll highlight more relationships again. So stay tuned for those. But in the meantime, what's on the docket? What have we got coming up next?
All right, so next week we're going to be talking about Rory's dance and forgiveness and stuff. And the main sort of theme that I felt connected those episodes was generational traumas. So again, this idea of where you lead, I will follow, cycles repeating themselves. You know, in the dance episode, we have that confrontation, that amazing, amazing scene between Lorelai and Emily in the kitchen where everything just sort of comes rushing back to Emily, and she has it out with Lorelai about, you know, Rory getting pregnant and throwing her life away just like Lorelai did. So we're really going to dig into that fight and discuss the dysfunctional dynamics there. And also we have in forgiveness and stuff, Richard's angina causing everyone to come together and watching how Lorelai has trouble reconciling, you know, with her father in some ways. So it'll be sort of talking about the ways in which our parents' emotional growth or lack thereof can hamper ours and how that affects our kids and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So please join us for that. We would love to have you come back and keep supporting us. We appreciate you watching our episodes, anyone who's here. That being said, just talk with us. Drop us a comment in the chat as you're watching our premieres. Send us an email if you want to do so. We would love to hear your feedback. But we can also be found on Instagram and Twitter, and links to those social media accounts can be found in the description below if you want to follow us and stay up to date on our content. And of course, just remember to do all of the major YouTube-y things. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, turn on the notifications so you get updates on our content, and please just always come back and join us for Friday night dinners. We love to have you here, and we appreciate all of the support.
Yep. And on that note, we'll see you next Friday for dinner.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.